the one source, Sports Card Nation. The hobby is the people. Sports Card Nation.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to episode 261. Hope you enjoyed the previous two episodes with Marshall Fogel. Very candid, did not tell me I couldn't talk about anything, and very, based on the downloads, very well received. So appreciate everyone out there listening to those two episodes. He's not a frequent guest on podcast. I did 2 episodes. You're seeing me do sometimes these 2-parters just to keep the episodes at a decent length, around 30 to 45 minutes. That's my goal. So let me know what you think about the new format with the 2 parts, if need be, to keep the episode shorter and sweeter. Today's guest is a great guy. Built a company, with his partners from the ground up. They're still doing big things in the fractional market. Rob Petrozzo of RallyRd, more commonly known as Rally. He's going to be on today. We're going to talk about the Mantle House, something you've heard me already talk about as someone who bought shares, where the fractional market is today, the birth of the company, how it all happened, and some other hobby goings on. So with that being said, let's get the show started.
For more than 30 years, Robert Edward Auctions has been the nation's premier auction house, specializing in sports memorabilia and trading cards. With significant experience and expertise in all major sport, non-sport, and Americana collectibles, REA has helped clients achieve record-breaking prices for their items and has done so with a reputation for integrity and transparency. By actively partnering with collectors and enthusiasts throughout the entire process, REA has created the hobby's most trusted forum for selling high-quality collectibles. Go to robertedwardauctions.com for more information on how to buy or sell in their next auction. For nearly 50 years, Sports Collectors Digest has been the voice of the hobby, bringing you comprehensive coverage of the sports collectible industry. From industry news, auction results, market analysis, and in-depth stories about collectors and their collections, Sports Collectors Digest has everything you need to know about the hobby. SCD is also your leading source for listings of sports collectible dealers, card shops, card shows, and the latest from the industry's top companies. To check out all the latest news or to subscribe to the hobby's oldest magazine, visit sportscollectorsdigest.com or call 1-800-829-5561.
Real excited to talk to the next gentleman on the Sports Card Shop guest line here on Sports Card Nation. I've talked to him a little bit off the air and got him to know a little bit that way, but this is his first time here, and glad to have him. Rob Petrozzo of Rally, welcome.
John, thank you, man. I appreciate you having me. I always get excited hearing the Sports Card Nation intro. It feels like something epic is about to happen. We're about to have a real conversation. So thank you for having me, man.
Yeah. No, thank you for making some time. I know you're a busy guy. We're also recording this during the holiday time too, so you factor that in there as well. So I appreciate it. I know a little bit. I don't know everything. I know a little bit of kind of where Rally came to be and why. But for those who don't know and listening out there, kind of how Rally was born, so to speak.
Yeah, so it's been a long time coming. We're 6-7 years in, and I'll be honest, the same way as you, I don't know everything either. We're still putting it together ourselves 7 years later, you know what I mean? But really, this all started, to give background, it's really a place to kind of invest in the objects that you know and kind of discover the ones that you didn't know existed. But in reality, it's a place to invest and kind of put your money where your mouth is. We've always looked at every single asset class that we go into, whether it's cards or memorabilia, or it's NFTs, or it's dinosaurs, or it's classic cars, or it's watches. We take these assets that have these huge affinity groups around them and people that really care and love it and make it a big part of their life. We fractionalize the most important assets in that space, and then we sell shares in it, which trade similar to the way that stocks might trade in the stock market. Then along with that, it's about telling the story, and it's about really bringing people into these assets in a way that It's more than just a ticker symbol like you would pay for on like the stock exchange or that you would buy on a regular brokerage account. So a lot of what we do, whether it's in our physical spaces like our museum here in New York or it's inside the app, is about taking that asset, taking that item, that card or whatever it is, breaking into shares. You can own it for $10, $15 if you wanted to, some of the most important pieces in the world, but also tell the story appropriately and tell the whole backstory behind a lot of these items, which I think a lot of times they could take it for granted for their beauty or for their price. We really want to bring these things to life in a more effective way. And that was really the impetus for starting this platform. Myself and my co-founders, Max and Chris, was really about how wrapped up we were in those stories. And for me, it was cards, it was art, it was the things that I really cared about as a kid. And it was like the feeling of being this 10-year-old or this 12-year-old and never being able to have the best thing. I think I've told the story before, so this isn't just because I'm on this podcast, but the 414 Frank Thomas rookie card to me was like the start of this business. That's kind of where we started the conversation. For me, that was this card that you would go to card shows, or I go to Staten Island Mall and they have all the tables set up on Saturday with everybody selling cards. And it's me and my friends, and we're like, 9, 10 years old. And you see all these cards, but Frank Thomas, like 91, 92 is the biggest thing on earth. And it wasn't thought about as like a way to make $1 million because you're 10, 11 years old. But it was this card that felt so out of reach, and it would be like in its own, it would be like always in screw down cases, or it would be separated from the rest of the cards sitting on this table. And like a bad version was like $50, $60. And for me and my friends, it was like, we got to save money to get this card. We have to have this in our collection someday. And the thought process was always like, how do I get there? How do I get that? So for us, it was like, all right, think about that same 12-year-old kid, that same 10-year-old kid now in their 30s or in their 40s, and looking at these, a Honus Wagner card or a Mantle rookie, or looking at these larger than life cards that are now, well into the millions of dollars in some cases. How can you take that and make that a part of their life in a real way and let them have that be part of their collection? And that for us was kind of how we thought about this platform. We started putting it together, was there's a way to do that. It requires some regulation, securities stuff, and lawyers, and it requires this product and this app that brings it to life. But if we can make owning that as easy as it would have been if I had the money when I was 11 years old to take it off that table and walk away with it, then we'd have something. And kind of, 6, 7 years later, we've just been doing that now for the better part of half a decade, and it started to work. And I think the world has started to realize that collectibles, just like anything else, are an important part of their life, their identity, and their portfolio at the same time. And we've tried to make that last part happen.
Yeah, well said, and awesome stuff, right? And how difficult, going back to 6, 7 years ago, Rob, how difficult when you're just starting to acquire some of these things for the company to offer. Talk about sort of the, plus fractional's fairly new. I mean, it's kind of been around in different sort of forms, but really sort of new, especially to the collectibles space. People would always say, well, if I can't own the card outright, and speaking on the sports card side only, I don't want to, I have to wait till either I can afford it or just never own it. How difficult, I guess, two-pronged question here. How difficult was it to acquire some of the items? Maybe people were a little apprehensive to, price, obviously, it all comes down to that. And maybe more so, probably more difficulty on the offering side. We're getting people to buy in where they're not actually going to have always physical possession of the item.
Yeah, I think, when we started doing it in 2017, 2018, the first 3 asset classes we went into were classic cars, watches, and then sports cards and trading cards. So that was to break into those worlds. And this, sometimes it's not just money. Like if we had money to do it, I would have just gone out and bought everything. But in reality, we knew, like in the sports car vertical, we wanted to start with a T206 Wagner and with a 52 Mantle. And then we added a Fleer Jordan, because that to us was like the trifecta of the things that A, are on the positive trajectory, but B, are the benchmarks for collecting, and not just in the hobby, collecting in general. Everybody who collects coins or, collects classic cars even, or watches, has an understanding of what a Honus Wagner card is. And they know what the history and the story behind it. They know that one's never sold for less than it was purchased for. They understand like the history of Honus and why he pulled the cards from the production run. So that's this thing that we knew we needed. Just money doesn't get you a Wagner, because there's, if there are 60 or 50, and the numbers are always a little bit subjective, that means there's probably 10 that are actually like available at any time. But again, to get in touch with those people is impossible. So for us, like, we raised a little bit of money on the first concept. It was easier to get the cars first, because the car community, it's not that it was more inviting. It was just one that, we're able to sort of make connections in that space and start the conversation with people who have these cars. And typically it's not, you can't fit a car in like your safe in your apartment or your home. So like they would already kind of be out and about. You would kind of see them a little bit here and there and be able to start the conversations about acquiring them. So when we raised the first amount of money from venture capitalists, we told them like we got to buy the first 2 or 3 assets. So myself, Chris, and Max, we took money out of pocket, put as much in as we could. We were able to finance a couple of the first 2 cars that we put on the platform, and then start some of those conversations with the VC money that we had to get 1 or 2 more cars. That was the start of it. That's where it was like, all right, we can kind of do this now. Now we talk to our lawyers about how to make this work. And at that point, crowdfunding and platforms like Kickstarter and even GoFundMe and a few others were starting to rise up, where the leverage was now on the consumer to sort of to bring things to market and securitize them. So we told our lawyers, if there's a way to do it like that and work with the SEC to qualify these, can we make that happen? The lawyers came back and said yes. So now it's like, all right, we have the first 2 things checked off. We have the asset that we need, which the first one was like this Lotus, and then a 1955 Porsche, which is kind of like the Mantle of cars, this 1955 Porsche Speedster. Now we have the regulatory aspect of it, where we have our CFO, Max, and our lawyers are working on making this look and feel like a stock. And then it was just distribution. It was about how do we actually sell these now that we have them. So then we started building this app, and that was kind of my section, was in the product side, building it the whole time and making it tactile and put it in the hands of friends and other investors and people who might use it. So we opened the first IPO. We syndicated it to our family and friends, and like we got a huge email list. We might have bought an email list or something early on. We had like 3,000 or 4,000 people. And 1 or 2 investments started to come in, and then like 3 or 4 investments started to come in, and then word of mouth starts to pick up a little bit. Then we got a little bit of press. All of a sudden, we're on Fox News, and they're showing the car, this 1955 Porsche. They want to roll it into the studio to show people, and now it starts to pick up. So now it was like, all right, the phone started to ring a little bit at that point with people who wanted to help in the other verticals. And one of the most important relationships that I had personally, but for this business, was Mark Zablo from Bleecker Trading, who I've known for 20 years, and is somebody that has always sort of preached like ownership and equity. And he's always been really, really smart about putting businesses together. But he's also been a collector, and he's been, he's got one of the most important, in my opinion, one of the most important spaces in New York now for the hobby at Bleecker Trading on Christopher Street here in New York, in the city, which Manhattan has no card shops like that anymore. So to put one in New York that looks and feels like the late 80s, early 90s is crazy. And he's really on a wave with that now. But he made a couple of intros to us, and he introduced us to Ryan Shimon, who's a close friend now and a collector, and Ken Golden. And Ken, at that point in 2017, 2018, I knew who he was. We'd probably emailed back and forth here and there, but he wasn't giving me the time of day until there was something actually worthwhile having a conversation about. So we sat down and talked about what we were doing. He liked the idea. He knew it was complementary to the auction business, where early on, I think a lot of auction houses looked at it like, I don't want to even think about potential competition in the future. And I told him the truth. I was like, dude, I need a T206 and I need a 52 Mantle, but I'm not talking about PSA 2s Mantle and like a bottom of the barrel Honus. I need one with the story. And like, he's like, all right, give me a few months. And then we started back and forth having conversations. And he, without having any equity in his business or any ownership, he made the intros, and we're able to make a couple of those things happen with his sort of stamp of approval. And that kicked off really the whole business. So with that in mind, once we started moving along and we started seeing these IPOs work, and trading is working, and we're selling merch, and we're opening physical spaces. Now, the last 2.5 years, especially since the pandemic, so much of it's been inbound, and people understand that this is a place where A, like we have a great collection, but B, we're going to have this stuff like on display in our museum. We're going to do a great job storytelling on it. We're going to get press around it, and we're able to sort of, sell items relative to the real market without having to sort of chance it at auction, I think. And that became a really important part of what we do now later on, now that a lot of what we've been able to do is consignment or inbound without having to sort of hit the streets and like go door to door trying to figure out where the Honuses are buried. You know what I mean? So that's a long story, but that's the trajectory where it came from, like any other business. You start off putting the money out of pocket, you get some people who believe in you, and all you need are 2 or 3 of those people who have those connections, who really truly want to help. And that's where we got lucky really early on. Then obviously the pandemic, everything went parabolic and it became a whole other world. But we were lucky to get in before that to establish the relationships before it became, that crazy era of 2020 to 2022.
I'm just going to disagree with one thing you said. You can put a car in your safe. It has to be of the Matchbox variety.
That's true. That's true. Which also, Matchbox cars have become like an asset class. People love them, and the prices are going crazy. So you're absolutely right.
So I'm poking a little fun at you, obviously. You mentioned those 3 cards, right? Like you said, you call them the trifecta, and they're great examples of people who aren't even in the hobby. You show them a picture of those cards or the card themselves, and they still know what those are. Or they have some sort of semblance of what those are, and they're iconic, And so, that's kind of a collectibles wise, it's kind of, getting in, right at the top shelf, if you will. You mentioned with the pandemic hitting, was that good or bad for Rally, or a little bit of both?
I mean, I'll be honest with you, it was both, because now you're at a point that demand was so high and it was such a seller's market at that point where they can dictate any price they wanted. It got to this place where in the beginning it was fantastic because we were, our Jordan, our Fleer Jordan, we IPO'd it for $40,000 and sold it for $90,000 in 8 days. Everyone got their money back on it quick. And, we did a bunch of merch around it and a bunch of activations. Everything was working. But inevitably what happens is that you get a lot of people that came into the hobby. And I think this is where we are right now in the hobby. I'm not in any position to be a mouthpiece or be on any soapbox to speak for the entire hobby, because there's pockets of it that are obviously very different. But I think everything has gotten so polarizing to this point, and there's so much sort of frustration built around what happened during that window of time and where we are now. I get nervous even talking about Jordan rookies. I get nervous a little bit talking about Mantle. Honda's not as much, but because those cards, to me, when you see the giant prices printed, when you see $12 million spent on a card, when you see everything that happened with the Jordans and having them come back down to earth around that 175-ish or 200 number wherever they're at right now, somewhere in that range, people look at it and say, you see, like it's all a scam. The whole thing is all make-believe and cardboard doesn't even matter. And you have this crazy run-up from people who don't know any better and just threw money at it. And for us, we're in a position that we have huge demand. You have hundreds of thousands of people coming to our platform saying, what's next? In this window of time where, to keep it entirely real, we probably could have IPO'd any card and filled it, not at any price, but any card. And I think what happens is that once you go through those top tier and you have, sophisticated investors in the same room with retail investors, with people who just want to come in and be a part of it because they're starting to read about how crazy cards are and how wild the prices are. And it's trading like crypto basically at that point. And they're just looking to get their money in. Now you have this crazy rush through the doors that when the rug gets pulled and that demand isn't there anymore, there's lots of cards on Rally right now, but you're going to be down because they followed the market. So now, inevitably, what happens is that, unlike the NASDAQ, when Apple stock goes down because of something with profits or whatever, people aren't going to blame NASDAQ or the S&P. They're not going to blame the stock market. They're gonna be like, oh, Apple did something wrong. You know what I mean? I think for us, we're kind of like the exchange. But when cards are down 80% in the real world and then they're down 80% on Rally's the problem in that case. And that's just what we have to deal with. And I understand that, because I'd probably be the same way if I came into something and spent $100. Now that 100 is worth 80 because I bought, a specific card that no longer has that demand that it did during the pandemic. But for us, it's about making sure that the breadth of cards and the breadth of assets that we have on the platform is diversified so that you can make those decisions asset by asset by asset. And to say everything is down is the wrong way to put it in the hobby in general. To say everything is up if it's only, this vintage era from this period is also incorrect, because you're going to find outliers in there too. I think for us, I would have done a couple things different, no question, during the pandemic with the way that we acquired assets. But I think that the victim of the success mentality that we had at that point was the same for every consumer who thought nothing was ever going to come down. And I took a bath on a ton of stuff personally, like a bath on so much of the stuff that I thought was going to be the most important stuff in the future. I made money on some stuff too on paper, but I never really sold anything. So now we're at a point that for us to look at the things that always work for us, the Honuses and the Mantles and the pieces that are really the most important parts of what I believe is this hobby, I believe is collecting in the future, it requires us to tell that story more effectively and find more ways to sort of get ongoing revenue around these assets and find ways to monetize and find ways to add liquidity to all of those assets, whether they were during the pandemic, before or after. And that's people saying Rally's wrong and Rally effed up and Rally shouldn't have done this. I can't say they're wrong, because that's an opinion. It's completely understood. For us, it's about gaining trust and earning trust, whether it's getting trust back from existing investors or building trust with new investors and new participants on the platform.
It's refreshing to hear you kind of say that too. Like, hey, listen, we're human. We're doing the best we can. The pandemic was, I called it the Midas touch during as you well know, everything during the pandemic, hobby wise anyway, you could almost do no wrong. And so it's tough to come out of that and expect the same, or expect stuff not to settle down. Like you said, it's not so much your guys' fault. It's just where the market is at. But obviously sometimes you're going to be on the front lines, getting fingers pointed at you. And it's nice to hear you say, hey, hey, we got to take that as
you got to take it on the chin sometimes, man. You know what I mean? Like I'm telling you from personal experience, like I have lost money on lots of modern cards. Forget it. Wax that I bought, I'll never see the money on it again. But to me, I was never buying it. Some of the stuff I bought in my head were speculation, no question. I have like a lot of LeBron stuff. I'm in love. Like I've always loved Kobe, and Kobe to me, I've never thought about as like a commodity. I've always thought about it as a person. Like I'm buying his sneakers, and I play basketball in his sneakers, and I'm buying his. Last season I bought so many ticket books and so many tickets for Kobe's last game. I wasn't even thinking about them as like selling them until the prices started getting crazy, and I gave them away as gifts and stuff. And I felt like that was a piece of me as my identity. But I think a lot of what happened is that there's so much dissent in the hobby right now, I feel like, and I'm not trying to fight it because it's something that I care deeply about, but I try and stay out of a lot of the fights if I can. But I think that a lot of people will look now from the pandemic to now, especially, they're looking for the conspiracies and like malfeasance, and like they're accepting rumors with no actual facts. I think every breaker with like a big hit is getting loaded boxes now all of a sudden, or every $100,000 card sale is like a shill sale. And every time Panini does anything, it's a scam now. And I think that, Fanatics putting one of ones in the wrong box, like that's a marketing tactic. It's a scam. It's a scheme. I think everything doesn't have to be this upside down like fight. That's not the hobby to me. And I think that a lot of people got wrapped up in that, and they claim they weren't in it for money, but all their anger and frustration came after car prices retreated over the course of the last year and a half. So and then they started putting the content out and talking crazy about who's doing things wrong. So to me, it's like, yes, there's a lot of things that we do rally that probably wouldn't look good to a purist of the hobby. A lot of it is commoditizing something that people really, really care about. But if truly is a hobby, and it's something that like, it's great if you make money on it. If you don't, you have that hobby, you have these things you really care about, these things that make you happy, that bring nostalgia, that bring you joy, that feeling of like opening a pack of cards and what it smells like and feels like, and all these things that I know I pride and I think about as myself, like things I want to do, whether I was making money or not. If it's really a hobby, then it should be treated that way. If it's something that you're planning on making money on as a business, and whether it's a content business or it's, you flipping cards, that's something that pointing fingers at somebody else who's treating it as a business and saying like, look at all the things you did wrong, to me is the wrong take. And I think that's something that only really exists in this hobby. I don't see it the same way in other places. This one's the biggest, so it's obviously gonna get the most attention, but it's concerning to me sometimes. It's a thing I care about, but I feel like a lot of times they don't want us in the conversation. So I'm kind of like tiptoeing around telling people how I truly feel about it sometimes. But that said, I know there are things that Rally's done wrong. It's like there's things that everybody's done wrong. For us, now it's about like thinking about what the future looks like and thinking about that 5 and 10 year cycle, and not that crazy compressed moment that was COVID that everything went crazy on. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no doubt. I agree with you for the most part, Rob. I think some things that happen are legitimate, like where there's smoke, there's kind of fire. Fair. But I think you make a great point. It's not across the board. Every time something happens, everyone's quick to, convict and pass judgment and go to the execution, chamber without really deep diving in it or doing the research or finding out what really happened. And I think some of that, I don't know if you agree with this, I think some of that just comes from the hobby's in a different spot, and people aren't making hand over fist in the same fashion they were. Someone like me just says, hey, I've been doing this so long, I knew this was going to happen. I didn't know exactly when, but I knew it would. And you just roll with the punches. Maybe some other people not as old as me or as experienced had a tougher time, handling that. And, what do unhappy people do sometimes? They want to make other people unhappy too. Come be in my unhappy boat with me, and here's an oar, and let's row, right?
That's a better take. That's a better take than I had. That's a way more articulate way to say it.
And I think a lot of it, and I've said that on the show, right? I think a lot of what we see in the space comes from that point of view. Sometimes it's just jealousy, right? Some people are happy for others' success. I try to be that guy. Some others have a harder time with that. So the minute there's one indiscretion or what even looks like an indiscretion, they're just right there to jump on it, put it on social media, and some people just feel better about themselves when they're making someone else look bad. It's the wrong way to go about it, if you ask me, but that's not a new concept. I think it's been around oh wow, I think we're just seeing more of it just because the way things have settled down.
No question. To me, that's a good thing and a bad thing too, because the popularity of this space is so prevalent right now. And when I start getting like texts from my mom about like card auctions, and I'm not talking about like the big giant like Wemby jersey, rookie jersey, debut jersey selling for $750,000. She's in the weeds. Like sometimes she's texting me about like some random like Wade Boggs card she saw on eBay type of thing. You know what I mean? Like there's some, when it's like that, it's everywhere. You know what I mean? It's omnipresent, it's ubiquitous, and it's in the conversation. That to me is amazing. That's the best thing that could possibly happen. So when it gets there, though, it's like you said, it's not the same as it was. So I think a lot of people get scared of the future, and they get scared of new products and platforms, and they get scared of like, when Fanatic, you remember when Fanatics first came in, and it was like, what's this going to be? They're going to kill mom and pop stores. You know what I mean? And then it started to sort of take shape a little bit. People realize like maybe it's just the distributors that are going to get pushed out a little bit, and they're making these huge rips on it. Maybe mom and pop stores are what they want to focus on. The narrative changed. Ruben started showing up places. It took like a year and a half people to start trusting them. You know what I mean? And now it's at a point that it's like assumed that they're going to, or not assumed, I shouldn't say that, but people look at it like if we're going to get where we're going, it requires more people, bigger space. It requires, more people being accepting of new products and platforms and new players in the space. That to me is a net positive, no question. But it's scary when things change, when what you've known for 20, 30, 40 years, all of a sudden is different. And you said it too, having gone through, I was super young, but having gone through the junk wax era, like, some of my favorite sets are the ones that no one will ever care about again in my mind. Like there's, like those like mid 80s Don Russ, like are important to me because of like the Diamond Kings cards. And that was like Don Mattingly and these people that I loved. And same with like 87 tops, like wood borders. That's something that I look at and it's just, I know that's not going to like that Will Clark card is my favorite card of all time. Like I'm looking at that, like this, they're in my mom's house still. They're important to me. And I'm not mad that like everything is a refractor now and everything's a one of one. Everything's got to be like on card auto and all this stuff if I want to make money. Because I'm not trying to always make money. Some of it is just about doing these things that I care about and having these things I care about. But people get nervous when that changes sometimes. And it definitely has changed dramatically in a very short period of time. You know what I mean?
Someone's at my door. I've got to get that. Be right back.
Hobby Hotline is the hobby's only live interactive call-in show. Join some of your favorite hobby personalities every Saturday, 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific, and the first Tuesday of each month at 9 p.m. Eastern to discuss the hottest hobby topics. If you miss us live, catch us after the fact on all major podcast platforms. Follow us on socials at Hobby Hotline.
We are back.
And you know what's crazy too, Rob? Sometimes you almost feel like I set up at shows as a dealer as well. And, someone asked me, hey, how'd you do? And I'm an honest guy. I say, oh, man, the show was great or it was okay or whatever. It's funny. Sometimes people resent, like you talk about, you do it for fun or nostalgia. You can do it for money. Some people resent the money part, but like that, you got to pay bills, right? How do you pay? Yeah. How do bills get paid, right? How does your mortgage get paid?
How would you get the card? Somebody sold that to you. Like someone's running a business one way or the other, Like I never get that. To my last breath, I don't understand why people are so resentful of people who sometimes make money in the hobby. It's not a new concept. It's been many moons now. But there is that faction that it's almost like sacrilegious to them, or I've heard the term purist thrown around. I really don't know don't ask me what it means. I've just heard it, and I'll never get that, I'll never get that. And, I've had someone tell me like, if you cared about the hobby, you wouldn't sell your cards. I'm like, and I'd say, okay, that's your opinion. It doesn't mean you're wrong, but explain that to me. And then I don't, the follow up explanation was, in my opinion, all discombobulated and really didn't sort of 2 + 2 didn't equal 4. And I'm just like, so a lot of it comes from that jealousy point again. Like, hey, there's that person's making money. I wish I kind of could, but and I always tell people like, I'm not an expert or I don't think I am. I'm just experienced. Like, hey,
I'll help you out any way I can. Shoot questions at me or whatever the case may be. My door's always open. Rather than, get mad or take that stance. Hey, we can all win kind of together. And
It's the we can all win thing. It's just
yeah.
it does. If there are so many pockets, you know what? This whole interview, I'm like sad boy talking about what's wrong with the hobby, and there's so many good things that are right with it. But it is, I think maybe because at a young age, like there was a place on 13th Avenue in Brooklyn where I grew up called Walt's Hobby Shop, and that was like the spot where it was like this mix of like model airplanes, cards, some comic books. It was a whole bunch of stuff. But I remember like being really young. And the owner pulled up in a Mercedes, and that was just like this weird, eye-opening thing. It was like the guy that owns the stores. I thought a Mercedes was like $1 billion back then. So I'm looking at this guy pull up, and I'm like, damn, he's got that from selling this, like all these things. This is I want this to be my life when I get older. I want to just sell cool stuff in a store like this and have it and drive a Mercedes. And I think maybe I from that point I tied like money to it to a certain degree. But I remember there was never like a world where it didn't feel like there was success, whether it was monetary or through like building a great collection, that wasn't tied to the hobby. It felt like you could be really successful and make the hobby a part of your life, like almost like a business. I think that's part of where Rally came from, was the idea that it could be both of those things. And it still is refreshing when like people that I know, and I brought up like Mark Zabalo and even Ken Golden and people that are in the space now that are larger than life. Nobody right now that's making money in this space isn't a lifer. Like it's hard. The hobby doesn't accept grifters like that. When they do, they come and go really, really quickly. It's not years. It's like months, it feels like. And everybody could talk crazy about like, backyard breaks or for the people that do things a little bit more boisterous than others. But I think you meet any of these people who are doing it successfully, it's hard to find somebody who's truly successful in this space that's making money with cards that doesn't actually, at least in my opinion, doesn't actually care about it. It's hard to find somebody who has a little bit of trajectory and has been around for a minute that's making money with cards or with memorabilia that isn't actually in it, where you don't go to their house and it's full of the same stuff. You know what I mean? Like it's hard for me to look at people and think there's really like major grifters coming in here just commoditizing everything that this space is about and leaving quickly with the money. It doesn't feel like that. It's still a grind, and those guys have been grinding for a long time. A lot of them,
Yeah, and sometimes passion has many forms. Some people are just a little bit quieter than others, but that's passion. I mean, somebody would, I don't know if everyone agree, but that's how I see it. Sometimes, I grew up, I don't know if you remember him. You might be too young. Remember Crazy Eddie?
His daughter went to my high school, 100%.
Oh, all right. So that I'm sure you like. That's we had guys even way back when, right? Mr. Mint was loud, and I'm not. This is not necessarily new. Maybe we didn't have as many. I'll go that far, but the hobby is a much bigger hobby now than then too. So, in fairness to today's hobby, you're going to have more vocal people. I'm not so much worried about the vocals as the actions, right? And you can scream and be cute, funny, obnoxious, whatever term you want to use. But what do you do? And are you doing good for the hobby? And are you doing it above board? I'm more of an action speaks louder than
words. Always. We're both like from Brooklyn, and remember that era? Like that was Crazy Eddie was like the pinnacle of success to me too. Seeing that on TV, even at a young age, I was like, man, this guy's doing it, And then it's refreshing seeing like those Mr. Mint videos start to pop back up recently in the last 3-4 months. A lot of those like show videos are starting to pop back up, and it's like, damn, if this would have happened now, people have been all over him, calling it a grift, like they would have been all over him, would have run him out of town. But that was like that infomercial style, like everything in your face, was the way everything was sold between like 1979 and 1995. You know what I mean? Like it was all. Yeah,
you had to grasp someone's attention. You had to like, bam.
Yeah.
You look, even infomercial. Billy West here.
You kidding me?
Don West on the late night sale.
I made my grandma buy Shaquille O'Neal cards from him. You kidding me? It was the SNL sketch. Yeah. I literally made my grandma buy me cards on QVC.
There's a place for that, as long as there's nothing bad that comes. Again, actions will always speak, at least in my book, louder than words. Let's get back to Rally, Rob. Like you guys have had some crazy offerings, from historical documents a triceratops skull. I mean, just cars. Rare hand. I mean, we could do an hour just talking about everything. Everything. Do you have sort of? We're going to talk about it coming down the home stretch here. We're going to talk about an item specifically. But besides, and you know what that is. But besides that, has there been an item that you're like, holy crap, I can't believe this is on Rally?
I mean, all of this is in everything that we put on the platform for the most part. Like those items that you're talking about are in support of the 5 and the 6 and the 7-year-old version of me, all the way through age 15, 20, 21. So when we think about like the biggest ones, the ones that are the most important, I'm recording this in our museum right now in like our podcast studio. I'm looking at the Triceratops right now, the Honus cards in the front. Like these are the things that they're not just larger than life and they're not just these crazy expensive items, but even though every single category has like a story and every like Honus Wagner has a story, the story of like our version of the Wagner card and the story of our Triceratops and the story of our Declaration of Independence copy, like all of those are what make them to me like the ahas and like the oh crap type of items. Like our Triceratops is realistically like probably, I don't want to go on record saying this because I'm not a geologist or paleontologist, but according to our experts and the people we work with, it's the most important Triceratops skull and the most complete Triceratops skull in the United States. And it's one that, Jeff Bezos wanted to buy this one and he couldn't because it's ours now. And the same thing with the Honus card, like of all the Honus cards, there's, the Gretzky and the Charlie Sheen card, and there's like, all of them have a story. But the Nuns Wagner, the one that saved this monastery, that this guy left to this monastery in Baltimore, that has a really, really incredible story behind it. And they shaved the borders off and shellacked it. Like that is its own story. And that's the one that was covered by the Times and it's shown up in a bunch of documentaries. And that's the really, in my mind, one of the most important ones. So all these items and like our Declaration of Independence, which was in the family of one engraver who was the most well-known engraver in all of Massachusetts and all of New England during this very specific period of time from 1776 through the 1900s. All of that to me is, storytelling is at the heart of so much of the hobby in general and so much of collectibles in general. To be able to have a story within a story are the ones that make items the most important to me. And to like part of it is speaking on our most recent IPO in the Mickey Mantle house, the childhood home of Mickey Mantle. That to me, I didn't know enough about it until a year and a half ago when we bought the property and started talking to people on the ground and started talking to the mayor at the time and started talking to 4 or 5 people who were intimately close with the family and with the home and were from Commerce, Oklahoma. And when you start hearing like the bits and pieces of that story and how important Mickey Mantle was and still is to that community, and you see his name on every single street and you see his statue at the high school, you see these bits and pieces of it, you realize that there are certain people who are like no longer with us. And there are stories that kind of happened hundreds of years ago. But regardless of whether or not, a new generation ever knows, what Mickey Mantle looked like when he was at bat or what his batting stance was, they're going to know these stories. They're going to translate as long as the sport, as long as the hobby is important. There are these items and these things and these stories that are going to translate the same way. And those are the ones that are always the most important to me.
And a good segue into the Mantle boyhood home, Rob. I guess my first question was this the first venture into real estate for Rally?
Yeah. So we've been wanting to go into real estate for a while. And, since probably before the pandemic, we were thinking, what's the best way? We didn't want to just buy like a townhouse in Brooklyn or something like that and try and make it a thing and take a beautiful home and IPO. We wanted to have something that had a real story, but also, even like the handbags that we have and some of the items that might not necessarily seem like they translate the same way a card might, we treat everything like a collectible that should or could be in a museum. And whether they have a utility like a home does, or they don't, and they're just like a piece of cardboard, or it's something that just is this beautiful piece of art, we want to make sure that the story behind it makes sense, but also that it can live as a collectible in a museum of any kind. So when we were looking at homes, we had like 2 or 3 options on the table in 2020. And we started looking into this home in particular in like 2019, give or take 2018, I think. And it wasn't available at the time, but the owner hadn't lived there for like 25 years. It was originally supposed to auction with Golden, and it wound up getting pulled from the auction. I think it was in a card and memorabilia auction. They just plopped this house in, and the pictures weren't necessarily something that told a good story. I think the marketing behind it was really the issue. It wound up getting like a bid of 60 or 70,000 and they pulled it because it wasn't going to hit the reserve. And that was something that we looked at. We're like, all right, maybe this is our opportunity to get this home. So we started talking to the owner. We started thinking about what we could do with the space, and we wound up making the acquisition probably 19 months ago or so, a little less than 2 years ago. But then, it was pandemic time and like prices started going crazy on homes. And we started thinking about the work we had to do to sort of get it up to speed because it was 25 years old. It hadn't been lived in in 25 years. It's a 100-year-old house. So we had to redo the roof. We did a bunch of and we had to do it with like archivists and with the right people. We had to do a little bit of brickwork in the front. We had to do maintenance. We had to sort of make sure it was up to standards, like it hadn't been touched. So after all that was said and done, we had this pristine version of, a 100-year-old home that had this crazy story behind, more than 100-year-old home that had this crazy story behind it. And you look at the barn, which is kind of like sliding to the side a little bit, and it's got a bunch of dents in it. And the story behind it is that's where Mickey Mantle learned how to switch hit. And his dad and his grandfather would throw tennis balls and sort of, softballs at him, and he would just crush them into the side of the barn. Then they would run bases. He would sort of use that as the backstop. Like there was all these elements of it that were like, this property is really important. It looks and feels so similar to the way it did in 1935 when he lived there. And it's, the town where the Yankees scouted him, and the high school has his name all over it. And there's Mickey Mantle's are the street signs halfway across the town. You go there and you meet these people, and like, it is this story that is a baseball story. It's not just a Mickey Mantle story. So for us, by the time we got down that whole pathway, it was no longer a house. It was a collectible at that point. And you've seen what happened to everything Mickey Mantle related, whether it's the cards, whether it's the jerseys. It's always sort of top 10 in every category of sports collectible sales. You're going to have Mantle show up in there one way or the other. The only thing that hasn't really moved is like this house. And so we looked at it like no guarantees on the future, obviously, and this would never be financial advice. But we're like, if this was something that was treated the same way Graceland was, or some of these sort of monumental spaces that have been sort of built around the childhood homes of superstars, it could be something really important for the game, for the hobby, but for investors too. So when we did this IPO, it was like, all right, how do we tell the story the most effective possible way? So we put together a couple of vignettes. We made the card with the piece of the barn that blew off during a storm at some point like 2 years ago that was tucked into the barn. We did some cool stuff around it to make sure the story got brought to life, but that's really just scratching the surface. And I was talking to the city admin, who's a former mayor yesterday, Michael Hart, who's been super helpful throughout this whole process, about like what we can do that's additive to the town and not just like taking the space and making it investable. So like we gave off the first dividend check in that asset from the card sales. Basically, we put that right back into the investors' pockets. And now the next couple things we do might be around sort of trips out there and doing something inside the town and making sure investors get to be on the ground and see that story and feel that story the same way I did, in the same way so many people here at Rally had when we were doing that IPO.
Yeah, full disclosure, most people probably know this. I posted it on social media. I do own some shares of that. I mean, how cool when you really think about it. I know when I got in, one of the first things, with my humor, I went on social media, including Facebook, just even my personal Facebook, Rob, not even the show Facebook, and said, hey, you're looking, tongue in cheek, hey, you're looking at the new owner of Mickey Mantle's
You do own it.
home.
You're the owner.
Yeah.
You own it. So it's true. It's not untrue.
I own a 0.0014%, but no one has to know that, right? And I just had fun. I just had fun with that. But I mean, you're talking about an iconic, I don't even want to say baseball player, just an iconic athlete, an iconic person in American history. And, one thing, kudos to you guys too. I know you gave, it's a smaller town. I think population around 3,000, somewhere in that vicinity. You gave some shares to the town, the people that already live there, which I think was a great gesture on your guys' part. You didn't have to do that, and yet you did. When I found that out, I just thought it was an awesome thing on your guys' part, and it's a great offering, right? I mean, Mickey Mantle has even all these years later, has a huge following. I think it allows maybe the property to get its just due eventually, and that's the other thing. Shareholders are going to have a say in some of those decision making and that sort of thing. And when you think about that, I mean, that's kind of cool. That, to me, that's worth it right there, that you have like one vote, like on what direction it goes. And one vote per share. So that's our plan. Is like the proposals for that start in like a month and a half or so, right at the start of the new year. But the goal, I think, and this goes back to kind of a lot of what I think Rally did wrong during the pandemic, and I'll sit on this one, and I'll absolutely take the blame for this. There were a lot of opportunities that like buyout offers would come in. We would bring them to shareholders. They were, like the Pokemon set that we have. We got like a $600,000 buyout offer. It got voted down handily. And I think from that point forward,
everyone's like, now we're going to make $1 million on this. When Pokemon card prices retreated and the price retreated, now it's like, why didn't we sell that? I think a big part of what we should have been doing the whole time, we want to do more of with the existing assets and with new assets like this one, is continue to find ways to monetize along the way that bring back sort of profits to investors without having to necessarily sell their shares and without having to sort of offset by having prices only go up. I think with this home, it allows us to do something really unique in that open source, the ideas around monetizing that property or bringing more attention and more positive attention to it with the investors. So taking the proposals from anybody that, there's thousands of investors in that asset now, anyone who has an idea, as long as it's not like we're going to set the house on fire or something crazy, we want to take those ideas, package them up, present them back to investors and shareholders and let them decide what we do with this space in the most appropriate possible way. Where instead of having something that just now lives as this house in Commerce, Oklahoma, it becomes potentially a place that everybody's involved in what the future of it looks like and bring more attention to it whenever we can, which hopefully brings more value to that space as well over time, and not just the intrinsic value and the monetary value, but in the value of sort of pop culture. And I think that for us, anytime we get an asset on Rally, it's not just about whether it makes money now and it's important now. We want to make sure it's relevant way into the future. And we feel like this is a house and a home and a neighborhood and a community that's been, it's always gotten great attention. When you go there, you see it's a piece of Americana for real. But that home hasn't gotten the attention that we feel like it deserves. Because you go to a Yankee game now and there's as many number 7 jerseys as there are Aaron Judge jerseys. Like you see it at Yankee Stadium in 2023, So that for us, like this is going to be a space that baseball fans make a pilgrimage to. And, Major League Baseball is an investor in Rally. We have a lot of great people around us from the league. We've worked with Fanatics and we've talked to them forever. We've done deals with Topps in the past. We want to be able to do stuff with the people who are really impactful in this hobby with this space. I think that's a lot of what we want to be able to present to investors, as well as the opportunity to put it back on the map for the people who are the most important and sort of pushing from behind and making sure that a home and a thing like this stay on everybody's radar.
Yeah, well said. And I think you got the best interest of this. It's like you said, Americana, right? And even restoring the home to before putting it the IPO just shows you you could have probably went the cheap route and said, hey, here's the house, this and you didn't do that. By the way, a townhouse in Brooklyn will cost you a lot more.
I'm not getting one right now. I'll tell you that. Like, I'm not allowed back to the neighborhood I grew up in. That's a definite. I don't have the money anymore.
So, well, Rob, man, I love what you're doing, man. It's not an easy space. You guys been uber successful in the 6-7 years now. You're adding more things to the repertoire too as you go along, such as this with the Mantle Boyhood home. It's going to be exciting. I don't know how that might be a little tricky at the top, but something tells me you're going to figure out a way to do it. So looking forward to seeing what's next. I'd love to have you back. There's a couple of things I didn't touch on, but we can always get you back on as long as you come back on. But
of course,
I always give the guest kind of the final word. Share any socials, website, anything you want where people can see what Rally's doing and that sort of thing.
Yeah, catch us on it's RallyRd, RallyRD.com. We're at Rally on Instagram. We're on RallyRD on Twitter and across all the other social platforms. I'm Rob Petrozzo on every platform. And this is, I say this a lot, but it's the truth. Everything that we're trying to do is built around the investor community and the group that we put together that cares about what we're into and what we're up to. Whether you have a good opinion, a bad opinion, whether you have good feedback or critique, I personally want to hear it, and publicly or privately. And I think everybody at our platform and everybody at our company wants to hear it too. So any thoughts you guys have about what the future looks like, we're always down to have a conversation about that. And I appreciate you having me on too. And this is, it's been a long time coming because I've been a listener for a minute. I'm glad that you've been a really good voice in the hobby for a minute. You're someone I've always listened to. So to be on is like, and to sneak my way into the eventually see my way into the binder, dude, with the guest cards feels like a massive win. I feel like that's like my biggest win of the week. Well, listen, the feeling's mutual. I'm glad you came on, and let's not make this a one-hit wonder. We'll have you back. We'll get into some of your collection and that sort of thing. I'm definitely into that as well. The darn Mantle house, took up some of that space. So we'll have you back on. Maybe even follow up with that too, like where that. Yeah, for sure. That as well. So Rob, again, continued success. Keep killing it, man. Thanks again. Thank you. All right. Appreciate Rob making some time coming on. Finally had him on the show.
check out what Rally's doing and offering. If you missed out on the Mantle House offering, look on their secondary market. I believe you'll be able to still buy shares if that's something you want to do. And a pretty cool item. Whether you want to buy in or not, you got to admit, that is a pretty cool offering. So we'll have Rob back on again, maybe in a month or two, but really appreciate what he's doing. So
Time for our Hobby is the People Announcer of the Week.
Hello, this is Mark Hoyle, and remember, the hobby is the people.
If you'd like to be the Hobby is the People Announcer of the Week, do a WAV or MP3 file and send it to sportscardnationpc@gmail.com.
That's a wrap for this week. Huge thanks to you, the listeners out there, because without you, there is no us. If you like the show, we truly appreciate positive reviews. Big ups to our great guests who drive the show and our awesome sponsors who make it all possible. Sports Card Nation will be back next week, but don't forget to catch either Hobby Quick Hits or Card Mentions coming up on Monday. I'll leave you with this. How do we change the world? One random act of kindness at a time. Remember, the hobby is the people.
Iron Sports Cards is your #1 source for all your PSA and other grading submissions. Their elite status improves turnaround times. Heck, they even provide the card savers. Their chat rooms provide updates on all your submissions. They also offer wax options and single cards to cover all the bases. Check them out on Facebook at Iron Sports Cards Group or on the web at ironsportscards.com, or even give them a call at 1-877-IRON-PSA. Rob's got you covered.
Are you a new sports cards collector or someone returning to the hobby? Maybe you're just looking for a friendly, trustworthy hobby community to hang out with and enjoy collecting. Midwest Box Breaks has been bringing collectors together for many years with affordable breaks, helpful threads, and a Discord group packed with generous people who genuinely care about the hobby and other collectors. Check out the breaks at MidwestBoxBreaks.com. Our goal is to bring you as much value as possible. Also, find us on Twitter at MidwestBoxBreaks.
Also, remember to check out Midwest Box Breaks Marketplace for breaks, packs, and single cards from over 300 trusted sellers. Apply to sell today at iso.gg/Midwest Box Breaks.